Welcome to my new channel. In this first video, I'm going to be doing a 8-rib conversion on a 2005 to 2009 Mustang. As you can see, these are the old 6-rib pulleys. I've already done the job and I'm just going to go over everything you need to do this job. Obviously you're going to need all new 8-rib pulleys. The only one you don't need is the water pump pulley. It's wide enough to just run an 8-rib pulley by itself. So tools you're going to want for this job are a couple of ratchets, a 1/4 inch and 3/8, an 8mm, 10mm, 13mm sockets, those are 3/8. You're going to want a 3/8 torque wrench, a medium-sized flathead. You're going to want a 1/2 inch breaker bar for sure, medium length. 1/2 inch torque wrench you're definitely going to need for the harmonic balancer bolt. 1/2 inch sockets. The tool that I got for the alternator pulley, the end of mine was a 17mm, so you're probably going to want a 17mm 1/2 inch socket. I used an impact to get that off, so you're going to probably want some type of impact, whether it's pneumatic or electric like this one. Either one will work. I forgot to mention that this is a 33 spline alternator clutch pulley tool. The link will be in the description for this as well. 18mm, that's for the harmonic balancer bolt. You might want the deep well as well, because it just helps you clear some of the hoses a little bit easier down there. If you're going with the ARP bolt, then you're going to want a 12-point 18mm. The new pulley nut is a 24mm. You might want a swivel adapter of some kind. Just helps get the impact into the alternator space a little easier. You might need a few wrenches depending on what your puller tools require. Mine was a 13mm on one end, and I used a 13/16 wrench on the other. Probably going to want some Loctite for the AC clutch bolt, a little bit of gray RTV, I'm sure black or red or whatever would work too. You might want a rubber mallet or dead blow hammer of some kind. You might want a strap wrench for getting the alternator pulley off, just to hold it. I just ended up holding it with my hand with a glove and then impacting it off, but if that doesn't work, you might want to use a strap wrench around that to hold that. Now into the specialized tool, you're going to want a pulley remover and installer. Make sure it's an installer kit too. This is for the power steering. The installer kit will have these threaded rods on it that thread into the power steering shaft. Mine, the one I ended up using for Ford, is this, the smallest one, sort of silver one in here. Snap ring pliers, again for the AC clutch pulley. I used the 45-degree ends, and you're gonna need either I don't have it here because I rented it, you're gonna need a harmonic balancer installer tool, or you're gonna need a longer bolt that fits down into the crankshaft so that you can kind of pull the new balancer on. If you don't go with the ARP bolt, you're gonna need the large washer that comes on, I guess the 5.4s. The trucks have a large washer that goes around the bolt. The nice thing about the ARP is that it just comes with that, so you can just use that. You're gonna need this. This is a 3-inch gear puller, 3-job. That's for removing the stock harmonic balancer. I also forget to mention that this is, I think, a 14mm. So I used a 14mm ratcheting wrench on that. And I think that's it. I recommend ordering the new 8-rib style tensioner, like a whole new one. You can just order the 8-rib pulley and put it on your stock one, but the offset is just slightly different on the 8-rib tensioner. So I recommend getting that one. It might make the bearing last a little longer because the belt will sit a little bit more centered over the bearing. Part numbers will all be in the description. the coolant reservoir to give yourself a bit more space to work down in the pulleys. I know they changed the way the coolant hoses work on 07 and up Mustangs, so if you have an 05 and 06, you might not have as much play in that hose there to do that, but that really helps getting at the crank pulley and the AC pulley. All of the idler pulleys are 13 millimeter. So I'm using an 18 millimeter deep socket to get in here with the breaker bar. Just gives me a little bit better clearance from all the hoses and things. This position in place. Okay, so I put the bolt back in just so the puller has something to press against. And then what I did with the puller was push the jaws kind of all the way forward and kind of slip them into the slots in the crank or in the harmonic balancer, and then turn it left, and then it will kind of grab the 3 bosses that are there for the puller. And then you can kind of pull back on it or screw this jack screw in, and that'll put tension on there to keep the puller in place. On mine, the nut on the end, the bolt head on the end is a 14 millimeter, and I'm just using a ratcheting wrench. There's just barely enough space here for a ratcheting wrench. If you're gonna look for one with a fairly short jack screw or push bolt or whatever you want to call it, because there's not a ton of room down there, and the shorter the better. So it's easier to see with the pulley off the car. I didn't really get good footage on the car because it's really tight down there. So basically what you're trying to do is you want to kind of leave the bolt in there just engaged so you have something to jack against. And you want to get this gear puller behind each of these 3 inside tabs here. So one thing you can try and do is kind of try and set it in and then try and turn it left to see if you can get it to engage under the tabs. Or what I ended up doing was basically getting 2 of them under, putting a little bit of tension on it, and then getting the 3rd leg under and then cranking on it. This was probably the hardest part of the whole install, so once you're done with this, you're pretty much home free. And the reason you leave that bolt in there is that you don't want to jack against the threads inside your crankshaft, so instead you just jack against the end of the bolt. New pulley, long bolt. The idler on the passenger side has a shorter bolt, so just make sure you don't switch them up. New idler pulley. This one's from Billet Pro Shop. I think the snap ring goes in. So you can see there's a little snap ring that's retaining the bearing. You can see that. I'm going to put that inwards. Never mind, I'm putting it outwards because the offset's wrong. With the snap ring inwards, it was touching the timing cover, so I'm going to put it the other way. It's not making contact. Long bolt again. Getting the tensioner off is super easy. It's just 3 10mm bolts. And it's right under this passenger side idler. The only other pulley that's kind of tricky is the power steering pump pulley. As you can see, it's got this kind of duck lip on the front. I'm not sure if you can see that. And that's basically where the tool is gonna pull the pulley off from. So all you do with this installer tool is you set it down into the pulley, and then it'll come with these kind of half clamshell things that'll slip over top of that groove in the pulley. 2 sides. And then it'll usually come with a sleeve that you put over top of those 2 sides to hold them in place. And then you just hold this nut in place and screw the shaft down to pull the pulley off the pump. Okay, so for the clutch pulley, there's an 8mm bolt in the center, which you need to take off, but the problem is the clutch just wants to spin. Now when I read online, it said to use some kind of strap wrench around the pulley hub to keep it in place, but that didn't work for shit. So I'll show you what I did. Okay, so this is really hard to show with one hand. Basically, I took a medium-sized screwdriver, braced it up against the frame of the car there, and against one of the rivets. And then when you turn it, that'll give something to stop the clutch hub. and actually let you torque on that that bolt. And it's got Loctite on it from the factory, so it doesn't want to come out easy. If you had the fan shroud out, you could just probably get an impact on it and that would work, but I don't want to take the radiator hose off to get it off. There's a tiny little washer on here, don't lose that. It's to keep the spacing for the hub, to space just a little bit off the clutch. So yeah, you want to keep that. Once you get the hub off, you can see there's a snap ring there holding the pulley on. I'm using 45-degree snap ring pliers. The 90s didn't with these pliers didn't let me like clear the hub fully, so I used the 45s to get it on and off. And then to reinstall, I'm doing basically the exact same thing in reverse. I'm bracing the screwdriver against the rivet, but then this time going to the bottom on the subframe. I guess that's the radiator support. Here's the new 8-rib pulley. They say to put a little dab of gray RTV right in this keyhole here. I guess just to help seal up the front seal, oil seal. Okay, so today's a new day. You can see I already got the pulley back on. What happened was I actually needed to go get a pulley installer because the stock bolt wasn't long enough to reach into the crank with the pulley still all the way out. So with the installer, it's basically exactly like that power steering installer. You got like the part that threads into the crank and the nut that you run down. And it comes with a bearing and a big washer. Another thing to take note of is the new balancer actually has a recess where the stock pulley doesn't. I don't know if you can see that, how that's recessed in there. And because I'm using an ARP, a new ARP bolt, it comes with a new big washer that fits in there. And if you're using like a factory 4/6 bolt, you won't have that, so you're gonna need to either get an ARP bolt which comes with the washer, or I guess you have to buy a washer from a 5.4 or whatever these cranks come with originally. The bolts seem to be the same, but you still need that washer. And with ARP, because it's not a torque yield design like the factory bolt, you don't have to do that long, complicated process that the OE recommends, where it goes to 60 foot-pounds and then you loosen it off, and then you go to 80 and you loosen it off, and then you go to I think 100, and then you do like additional 60 degrees or something. You don't have to do that with the ARP, it just goes straight to 100 foot-pounds. Do not reuse your factory bolt that came off. They're torque to yield and you cannot reuse them. You have to get a new one or get an ARP bolt. So I noticed when I installed the ribbed pulley, it seemed like it was sitting way too far back compared to the crank, and especially compared to where the belt wanted to rest on the alternator pulley. So what I did was I actually got a couple of washers and put it in behind there to space this forward just a tiny bit. What I used behind the pulley was a 16mm metric flat washer, and then this is actually a spacer, 3/4 inch spacer washer. I used 2 of these and 1 of these. I used the spacers towards the block because this 16mm fits better against the bearing. It just gives it like a little bit more metal to bear against. That seems to be what looks the best to me. As for that idler lining up with the crank pulley, you may have to use only 1 washer or 3 maybe, but that's what worked for me. Keep in mind that when you're installing the power steering pulley back on, it is actually possible to push it on too far. So what I did was I put the pulley in its position while I'm pulling it on, and just trying to line it up as best as I can. Really, you're supposed to use like a laser level or like a laser alignment tool, but I can't really find one of those. So I'm just doing my best, looking from the top, looking from every angle I can see. I think you can also try and put a straight edge across the pulleys and try and get like all 4 corners to be the same, but I'm not sure if these lips, if the front lip spacing to the first rib is exactly the same. I'm not sure if they're the same. So I'm just trying to line it up best I can. The power steering actually has like a little bit of back and forth, like maybe 1/8 of an inch or something. So I guess it should sort of center itself when it's spinning, as long as it's not too far out. Now that I have the tool off, I can see that where it looks good to me is when it's just barely past flush. So I mean, that's a decent reference, because it should be just about flush with this. These bolts get torqued to 20 foot-pounds. All of these idler pulleys go to 18 foot-pounds. So the trick I use for getting the belt in is to kind of squish it down, one end of the belt down, so that you can fit it in between the idler and the tensioner right here. You can pull it through. And then you pull it down, wrap it around the AC pulley right there. After that, you can then pull it around every other pulley and kind of just feed it in where you need to. It really kind of only goes one way, so. And then do the water pump pulley last. Because I'm using the stock 6 reb belt, I'm just putting it on the backmost ribs, so there's 2 unused ribs in the front of all the pulleys. This is closest to the stock location of the belt. You'll see if you don't replace your idlers that that's exactly where the belt wants to ride. Once you put the coolant tank back and your airbox back on, then you can start the car and look at the pulleys and make sure everything's lining up, make sure the belt isn't trying to skip ribs or is wobbling or anything like that.